He's a Vietnam-era veteran and a retired decorated police lieutenant from East Hartford, Connecticut. He was an adjunct college professor in criminal justice. After 9/11, he went on and he was recruited by the State Department as a senior management analyst, leading a team of counterterrorists in subject matters who provided assistance to an array of international counterterrorist teams. Now he's, of course, retired from many of these positions. He holds a master's degree in public administration from the University of Hartford and his doctorate in political science from the University of Connecticut. He's currently the director of No Left Turn in Education in New Hampshire. And he often writes and speaks on the danger of critical race theory and what critical race theory is. Mike, you've been married. You are married. You're married to your best friend, Maureen. You have 2 children and 2 grandchildren. And the reason I bring that up, and I think it is important to mention that, because when we talk about critical race theory, we're talking about children and the influence of children. You've had children in the school system who are now older and have their own children. You're aware now of grandchildren and what's going on in the grammar schools, primary schools, and high schools. You've got skin in the game. So I want our viewers to know that as we enter into this topic of critical race theory. So as we jump on in and begin to explore critical race theory, I think a lot of people are just wanting to know, what is critical race theory? They hear it on the TV, they hear it on the news, read it in the newspaper. What is it?
Yeah, it's sort of, you're sort of trying to describe how a watch works in 30 minutes. And
Mike,
it's
should
so
we put up
involved.
slide number 1? Shall we put up slide number 1?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah,
okay.
Let's put that up.
All right, just talk to it and it'll be on the.
All right. Critical race theory is so fraudulent. It's so propagandized. It's so racist. It's so evil. It's hard to overstate how bad this is. And the only way you can do it is I want to briefly talk about its historical and political origins, and then quote some of their core literature, which, believe me, does not resemble inclusion, diversity, social justice. These are propagandized terms that hide what is really behind them, and you have to look at their core statements to understand all this. But let's start with their 2 basic origins. One, of course, is Marxism. Marxism, after the Bolshevik Revolution in the Frankfurt School in Germany, started a program called critical theory. And their notion was they could destroy any country by relentlessly criticizing its institutions. And eventually that country would weaken to the point where it could be overturned. This happened. This Marxist plan migrated to the Great Leap Forward in China. In the 1960s, we saw a lot of this in the United States with the Black Liberation Army, the Black Panthers, the Sudanese Liberation Army, the John Brown Society, etc. These were Marxist groups that were severely critical of all aspects of government, and their goal was to overthrow the government. Around that time, of course, there was a break from the core Marxists. The Marxists had infiltrated the academy relative to civil rights, and they eventually excluded and demeaned all white civil rights academics based upon their skin color, and informed them that they were going to resist their attempt to publish, and that only published theories from now on out of their academic school of thought would be by critical race theory advocates, which were Black. So one of the first things they did, when you hear people saying that this is a legal theory, this is the actual history of this supposed legal theory. It was the same propaganda from the Frankfurt School 100 years earlier. It was nothing new. The fraud in critical race theory starts with its very name. This is not a theory in terms of a scientific theory. It can't be tested. It can't be modified. It brings in no new science from other studies. In fact, it opposes science. It opposes rationality itself. And we'll talk about that as we go along. But I should probably say that for someone that's not familiar with this, it's just so bizarre especially when you get into the radical postmodern aspect of it. It's so bizarre and it's so heavily propagandized that it's literally hard to believe, which is why I wanted to post these quotes, because when I give these lectures and have conversations, I see people shaking their head as though they have to clear their head. And they ask me to clarify it. They literally can't believe the quote that I'm telling them.
Shall we put up slide number 2? And
yeah, let's put up slide number 2. This is a kind of an important one. This is the one that is done by Jean Stefancic and her husband, Richard Delgado. Richard Delgado was one of the fathers of critical race theory. And this is from their book, Critical Race Theory, An Introduction. And this quote requires some deconstruction, some examining. They say, critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and the neutral principles of constitutional law. Well, let's think about what that means, what they're saying. Critical theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order. In this context, the liberal order refers to Enlightenment era values. The Enlightenment era, of course, was when democracies took a foothold after the founding of the United States. It was the first time in human history in which Americans decided to, or which citizens decided to self-govern. This was an extremely radical idea. All countries on the planet had been, for the most part, ruled by totalitarian power structures.
a king, a queen.
A king, a queen, clerics, etc., a czar. You know, that was the standard for ruling. This notion that citizens could form a process and govern themselves was liberalism in the 18th century. This was the liberal order. So for them to say that they oppose the liberal order, it's important to understand what they're opposing. They're opposing self-governance. They're opposing democratic processes. And they make no bones about this.
Right.
This is what they're opposing.
Can I also say this, Mike? To me, in reading it along with you, to me it looks like word salad. It looks like gobbledygook.
Oh, it's always gobbledygook. It's always heavily propagandized. It's always communicating by inference rather than direct declarative sentences. It's always that. You always have to drill down and look for commonalities among different books to really pull. It's like pulling cold taffy. You have to really pull out what they're trying to say, but it's very clear what they're saying.
How about if we look at slide 3? That's another quote.
Let me just go on just to mention these other principles quickly. They're opposed to equality theory. They're opposed to equality among citizens under a rule of law. It's once again, it's hard to wrap your head around exactly what they're saying, but they're opposed to equality theory. They're opposed to Enlightenment rationalism. They are opposed to rationalism, a derivative of the scientific method, social research. They don't allow this. They're opposed to this. They're highly suspect of it. And they're opposed to the principles of constitutional law. Now, if you're opposed to constitutional law, what's left in law? If there's no constitution in which law is grounded.
The quote says the neutral principles of constitutional law, and isn't that part of blind justice? Neutral principles of constitutional law.
That's exactly what it is. And so what's left of law if you don't have grounding principles? You have the whims of whoever is in power. And so you really have to understand that this is what they're actually saying. This is their core discipline. This is nothing about racial equity or inclusion, etc., social justice, all these euphemisms that they have. This is what they really mean. This is what's in their core books. But I'm sorry, you wanted to go on to, is it Derek Bell's quote?
Derek Bell, yes.
Yeah, let's talk about Derek Bell. He's called the father of critical race theory. Let's see what he says about this. The whole liberal worldview of private rights and private sovereignty mediated by the rule of law needs to be exploded. Now that's a very interesting term. Notice he doesn't say we have to revise things, we have to revisit, we have to study more, we need more social science studies. He doesn't say any of that.
Blow
He
it up.
says it needs to be exploded.
Yep.
This notion of illegality, criminality, violence cuts all through this literature. And this is the father of critical race theory, Derek Bell. I
Well,
mean, let's
isn't
take
this
a look at his next sentence. The tradition of racial subordination, in his view, are deeper than legal sanctions. Well, if the solution required cannot be accommodated with legal sanctions, then what is Mr. Bell talking about? Mr. Bell is inferring, once again, violence, criminality, illegalities, because he's saying legal sanctions, legal processes don't work. So you're only left with violent revolution, which of course is Marxist theory. This is the Marxist violently overthrow oppressors, the oppressed unite, etc. This is what they're inferring all through their literature.
It's also the concept of exploding it up, blowing it all
Exploding.
up.
Why would you use a term exploding?
And private rights. I mean, that's what gives us our autonomy. Is our private rights.
Well, once again, we come back to Enlightenment era values, private rights, a stressing of individualism. He wants to do away with that. There are no private rights. They want to substitute private rights for group rights. And bear in mind, they get to define the groups.
Group. Right, right. You and I no longer, well, aren't we doing that a little bit now with the coronavirus? The vaccine. We're taking away individuals' liberty to make their own decision, right, wrong, or indifferent. And we're saying you have to have groupthink and be part of the groupthink.
Of course. Yeah, groupthink is what it's all about. And it's the carrot and stick approach. Either you agree with them or they punish you in one way or another. A friend of mine had an interesting experience on among these people talking about their school board issues. And one of the women interrupted him and said, "I'm interrupting you." She said, "People like you." And she went on. And at the same time, two people in the audience chipped in and they said, "You're implicitly racist," or "You should read, Ibram Kendi," and all these types of comments. And he said he felt so demeaned, so assaulted, because it appears to be a grassroots objection within the crowd to his question. But of course, it's not a grassroots. This is rehearsed.
Yes.
Critical race theorists actually have curriculum, and they actually role play this, how to shut somebody up in a crowd by demeaning him and humiliating him publicly. And they have their colleagues in the audience that appear to be disconnected to each other, but of course are ready to shut down discussion. I mean, this is so contrary to our notion of individualism and First Amendment freedoms.
Right. There's our constitutional rights being exploded.
Yeah, sure is.
So let me ask you, Mike, why is it so detrimental as an educational philosophy when we go to the curriculums of public schools? And I think you have actually maybe another slide 4 on this.
I'm not sure which one. Are we talking about the Ignatieff slide?
Yes.
We should probably touch upon this. This greatly answers this question to a great degree. Here's Ignatieff. Now, this guy died a couple years ago, but he was a renowned critical race theorist advocate. And he says the key to solving social problems in our age is to abolish, his words, abolish the white race. And as if that quote is not enough to understand his school of thought, he goes on, "If you're a white male, you do not deserve to live. You're a disease. You have never contributed anything positive to the world."
That's
now,
interesting.
This is the origins of critical race theory. It's hate-laden, racist nonsense. I mean, to call any of this a theory is an abomination of the word. But here we go. That's Ignatieff's quote.
Well, isn't some of this what we fought World War II over? The extermination of a race or a religion, if you will, of Jews, Gypsies, Romanians,
Well, of
where
course.
you're taking a race. In this case, he's writing the white Caucasian race. But anytime you're looking at taking a group of people based on their race and saying they deserve to die, I mean, isn't this Hitlerism?
Well, of course it is, and it's not justified. Not unlike Adolf Hitler, who claimed that the German people were stabbed in the back by the Jewish people at the end of World War I, etc., and that justified so much of his activities in World War II. And of course, he was greatly supported by books, for example, by Madison Grant about the progressive hierarchy of races at the time. And that greatly fueled his
Mhm,
thoughts about exterminating minor races. This is the same stuff. I mean,
mhm,
Grantism was sponsored in a notion of intelligence, but this is sponsored in this new type of racism is sponsored in a notion of who is morally superior. Somehow there's a moral superiority feature assigned to people that they claim have been oppressed. So they try to gather as many of those groups together, align them through all their intersectionalities, being you may be assigned to more than one oppressed group at a time. You may be a woman and be black and be a transsexual and be gay or etc. There's no end to the intersectionalities among these
right.
groups, and it seems like the more membership you have in different identifications, the more moral authority you have, the more license you have to object, the more privilege you have in society to oppress others.
Sure.
And that's what this theory is all about. And that's why they have this need to not simply identify groups themselves, but to identify the intersectionalities among these groups. Uh, it takes no heed of the fact that there of all the interracial marriages of the blacks and other people that are in our own families, and this notion that somehow one parent is oppressing the child and the other parent isn't. I mean, this is pretty bizarre stuff to
Hmm.
impress upon uh, uh,
Children.
young students in school.
Sure. Sure. About your
It's
own
pretty nasty
parents.
stuff.
About
I'm
your own
sorry.
parents. About your own parents or friends
Oh,
of your
yeah.
your classmates. Now, so then we have another. I mean, these quotes just go on and on. With Margaret Anderson and Patricia Hill Collins. I mean, wow.
Yeah, and that
Which
of
is
course speaks
slide
to this
5 I'm referencing.
idea of there not being they're not subscribing to science. This is also it's such a strange quote, and I believe that it's so important for people to understand these core notions of critical race theory when they start getting led down the primrose path of inclusion, etc. Yeah, Patricia Hill Collins, her comment in Race, Class, and Gender. She says that the idea that objectivity is best reached through rational thought is a specifically Western and masculine way of thinking.
So, in
This
other
is so
words,
bizarre, it's hard
objectivity
to
should just be
deconstruct this.
random.
I'm sorry.
I'm just thinking what she's saying is objectivity on any subject is just random because she doesn't believe that it should be to do otherwise, to have any rational thought process to come to a conclusion is just Western and masculine.
It's beyond childish to think that you would reach objectivity. Truth is what they're talking about. You would reach the truth about something without employing rationality.
Right.
I can't I can't begin to explain what someone is thinking when they claim these things. But even more importantly is her claim that this notion of rationality is specific to Western culture. That's that's kind of crazy. I mean, you're telling me Eastern culture was not they were not rational. Is that
Right.
your claim? It's it's crazy. Or that rationality is something that's masculine, as though females are not rational. It's hard to understand what they're meaning, what they mean to say, and yet what comes out crystal clear is that these people are so wrong-headed. They are so biased that they should this philosophy should not be anywhere near impressionable school children. It's just crazy.
So, I mean, I'm going on to our slide 6. Um, and so the question again comes back to, how did this system, critical race theory, how did it even catch on? It's so bizarre. It's
It's so
so
bizarre. And
far out.
but this was a theory that was promulgated by President Biden in a memo to the Department of Education to begin to formulate grants around. In this memo, this guidance memo, he specifically says that he wants to write around racial equity. Notice it's not equality. He wants to write around these euphemisms like systemic racism, which is a myth. There's no science indicating there's such a thing as systemic racism. This is a racist myth. But he wants to write grants around this as though this is legitimate science. And if you look at some of the legitimate science that he's talking about, his memo itself refers to a graphic that was displayed at the African American Museum that talked about whiteism and white supremacy and all these crazy notions, which are simply a pile of assertions. There's no science behind this. There's no intellectual school of thought that would lead one to believe that this is true, other than these emotive, nasty assertions that, if repeated enough, as Joseph Stalin would say, tend to become the truth in the minds of many. Speaking about this level of hatred, I want to make sure we have time just to talk about this one slide that's also in the African American Museum, the Smithsonian African American Museum in DC. And that's this slide of this Black woman holding the
Which
head
is slide
of a white
9. That's astounding. What is slide 9 all about?
It's astonishing, but they bring school children through to see this. This is the type of critical race theory advocate school of thought that this is about revenge. This is about what Derek Bell calls exploding our rule of law, etc. Again, this is about violence, illegality. I mean, for those of us that have seen this, when you see a severed head, it's like nothing else.
Right.
The instant you see it, that this is imprinted on your mind the rest of your life. There is nothing more vile that you can do to somebody than this. And to bring school children through to see this, and the expression on the model's face, she's very proud of herself. It appears that she's beheaded this woman. What types of discussion and analysis are you trying to evoke among school children with a nasty, vile display like this? Adolf Hitler used to have artwork like this. When we talk about Hitlerism and Eastern Europe, Adolf Hitler used art the same way to justify these types of activities. Artwork, with faces on rats, calling them Jews, and these types of things. It was same types of caricatures.
Well, and is it? Am I looking at the slide correctly, or it's the picture? She's in a field of flowers. So the dichotomy of doing something so violent, and she looks so proud and dismissive of the violence she just perpetrated, and yet she's in this lovely field of roses.
I'll tell you, I think you have a real insight here. The idea that she's surrounded by flowers. This is the same backdrop, by the way, for President Obama's presidential portrait, if I remember right. But this idea that everything is fine, she's among flowers, and this type of activity is justified somehow. It's a peaceful, justified type of homicide. This is pretty crazy stuff when you think about it. To bring children through this, to see this, it's inexcusable in my mind. That this would be in a national museum is embarrassing.
So at what age? We only have like 4 minutes to go. At what age is this being brought into the school curriculum for children?
Oh, it's being brought in K through 12. Kindergarten kindergarten students in California are being asked to think about what their gender is, that they can pick their own gender, etc. Their gender doesn't have to match their body. Think about the confusion you're infusing on these children. They don't even know what gender is yet.
Right. At 5 years old, most children probably would want to be their pet cat.
Yeah,
or a squirrel.
this drumbeat of confusion and their intersectionality is infused in all topics, from math to literature. If if you get an English assignment, you're writing in some critical race essentialist
Mhm.
theory. If you're in math, whatever you're counting or dividing are critical race essentialist objects of some type. How many police beatings, etc.
Mhm.
So it's infused in all topics, and it's extremely dangerous. And in
Well,
the meantime, and in the meantime, what are we not doing? We're not educating.
well, we're not.
Uh,
We're
you
not.
know,
The three R's, they're
right.
not getting because they're getting this. I was just looking at slide number 8. Third graders are told to rank themselves on power and privilege. Most,
Right.
again, third graders would not have one clue as to what that would even mean.
And
They're
they don't have a
9
clue. They don't
years
have a
old.
clue unless a critical race theory advocate explains it to them.
Mhm.
That's the problem. This is
And using
indoctrinate. This is straight up indoctrination.
indoctrination.
Yeah, there's no question. There's no question.
So as we close, Mike, so what do parents do? How do parents stop this poison?
Well, there's several steps. There's so much money involved in this. This grant is $6 billion that people are applying for. They have, social equity coordinators in Exeter, New Hampshire. The social equity coordinator there is a Black Lives Matter employee. The people that brought us, the riots of 2020 and
Mhm,
the
mhm.
homicides and the $1 billion in damage and the incalculable amount of injuries to police officers, etc. So how do you combat these people? The first thing you have to do is become informed with activities such as this. People have to understand, or should be eager to understand, exactly what this threat is, especially as it involves this gender confusion. And the second thing they have to do, obviously, is organize, get a funding stream, and combat these school boards, replace school boards members, pay attention to these elections, get these issues on the ballot, and replace these people at a local level, because that's where the damage is being done. And it's sad that we have to do that, but we have to stand up and be citizens. There's many Americans that have lost and sacrificed much more than this, much more than contributions out of our bank, and much more than our time and effort, to make sure that this country and these values survive. And we
And
just can't let this be washed away by
right,
this political correctness, by this nonsense.
right, right. And I think what we're looking at also is people need to be involved in, you mentioned electing proper school board members, knowing who they're putting into these offices, but also being very informed in what's going on in the school. Don't leave it up to the school board alone, but become involved in their parent teachers organizations and the
Yeah.
different things that happen at the school right on their own grassroots level.
And
Michael,
there are many organizations that can help
your
school.
left turn, your no
Yeah,
left turn.
I'm from no left turn, but not just to give myself a plug. There's many organizations that can help organize and educate people to inform them of this threat. Of course, no matter where we go, there's never anyone to debate.
Yeah,
Critical race
Michael,
theory advocates do not debate. All
I
they do is
really,
call you names.
I really do thank you so much for being with us tonight. I know 30 minutes goes by in such a quick time, but thank you deeply for being with us tonight and trying to break through this muddle, because that's what it is. It's despicable muddle. And thank you for joining us for Your Right to Know. Remember, to us, the GOP stands for growth, opportunity, and prosperity for all people. And we always stand for freedom, and that includes individual freedom. Thank you and good.
America, we stand for freedom. So let us all unite to yearn and strive for our republic that reflects our values, that preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might, that reflects our values and preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might.